We're rolling. Episode 2, Sound of Music. That is
Yes.
M-U-Z-A-K question mark? Yeah, no, that's correct. That's correct. Rob, how you doing?
I'm doing great, dude. How's it going?
You're doing great. I guess I should clarify episode 2 as in King Crimson. We decided we're calling this discography discussion. Episode 2, King Crimson. We're covering Larks Starless Red.
Yes, the second big period in King Crimson's history, I guess. And I wanted
And of course, when I say Larks Starless Red, I'm referring to the records Larks Tongues and Aspic, Starless and Bible Black, and of course, Red.
what should we call this period of the band? You know, the Red period, the Larks period, the
Well, it's funny because on my Spotify playlist, I actually have it called Larks Starless Red. Very original. We could call this, what should we call this? Because you could call this the Wet and Bruford period.
Yeah.
You can call this the Mark V era.
Yes, true.
It's a Deep Purple reference.
Yep.
I
I appreciate that, by the way.
No, of course. Let's call this. You know what? I'm gonna stick with my guns here. We're gonna call this the Lark Starless Red era.
Okay. How about the Larkless Red era?
The Larkless Red era. We can do that. The Larkless Red era, and forget about Starless and Bible Black because it's always been the underdog of these three albums. Anyway,
No, the Lark.
Why not include that name?
No, the Larkless. So Lark and Starless together. See?
Oh, I see. What you clever dog. You clever dog. Larkless Red. I see. I catch on. So, boy, did we have some technical issues just like with the first episode getting this set up.
But the good news is, although we had technical issues, and that was one thing I was going to say when you were asking me how I'm doing, I was going to say fine except for these friggin' technical issues, but you have since bought a new microphone. So
Yeah, I got a new microphone, so hopefully I will sound better. Listening back to the first episode, it was very hard to hear me. I think you sounded just fine, pretty crisp, if I say myself. But yeah, me not so much. So I invested in an old microphone in between episodes, and hey, maybe it'll sound better. And who knows? Maybe by like episode 7, we'll get it right.
we'll get it right, yeah. Like I said, just be patient with us, guys. For now, it's been audio only. Maybe we could just keep going with just the audio at the very least for the King, for the King Crimson discography series. Hopefully we can have it, kind of worked out by the next series. But, either way, I think the audio, especially with the podcast format, is the most important. So
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rob, I've decided we're gonna do a little segment here for subsequent episodes starting today. I was thinking about this. I was going back and I was listening to the first episode a couple days ago, and we're gonna do a little segment called Andy Picks Himself Apart. And what I mean by that is we're gonna pick apart all the mistakes I made in the prior episode.
Okay.
So you ready for this?
all right, have at it. Go for it, man.
So right off the bat, I was not consistent when we were talking about these albums. I kept saying album, record. Just pick one, damn it. So you know what? From here on forward, record.
Record sounds
We're going
cooler.
to use the word record. You need to call me out when I use any other word when we are talking about the record format. So none of this album bullshit.
Yep.
CD, vinyl, record.
Well, then I'm gonna call it album. So just
You call
just
it
to
album.
be contrary.
I call it record.
Okay.
And then the other mistake I made when we were talking about the first couple albums. See, I just did it already. God damn it. Record. Say it 5 times. Record. That might have been 6. I wasn't keeping track. Okay. Record.
Oh man.
The other mistake I picked up on that I made a couple times was when we were talking about the lyricist of the first 4 records. And that is, of course, Peter Sinfield. I referred to him as Seinfeld quite a few times. We're not talking about Jerry Seinfeld here, folks. We're talking about
Bam,
Peter
ba-dam, bam, bam.
Sinfield. So, Peter Sinfield, not Seinfeld. But yeah, other than that, I think we did okay.
Yeah, I thought it turned out well, and obviously, if you're gonna, if Andy picks apart his, what'd you call it again? Andy picks himself apart. Is that what?
Andy picks himself apart.
Well, since you're doing that, I will just pick myself apart on the technical side of it. Again, I hope everybody's patient. I'm trying to get all the technical stuff worked out. I'm still working on my degree in in IT, but information technology. So maybe once I get further in my degree, I'll be able to have this really worked out.
Yeah. So then maybe we should elaborate instead of episode 7 by like episode 39. We'll have it down.
Yeah. I promise by the next discography series we'll have this really sorted out. We'll have a video. We'll have like a basically video of us for the YouTube side of things, and when we start posting on SoundCloud and other other services, we'll basically have the audio only for that. So we'll definitely figure it out.
And I have to say too, and of course I kid around, but I do have to point out, I don't think we really talked about what the behind the scenes roles were for this series. I mean, you are the one that really solely does the technical side of this, because I'm just clueless as far as that goes. And I got to say that it's, even though we've been having a hard time with the technical difficulty, you have been doing an amazing job with that.
Thanks.
So you're kind of covering more of the technical side, whereas I've been kind of, I guess, covering more of the producing side of it. We have notes that we each read off of when we do these episodes, and I've been the one that's been doing the research for the different eras that we've been talking about, as well as putting all of that together.
Well, since I'm so knee deep in my other channel doing this stuff, I'm pretty well versed on it, and I feel like your teacher background is making you like putting the notes and the format together very well. So we make a good team, basically.
Make a good team. There you go. So the other thing I wanted to do before we really dive into this era of Crimson, Rob, is we were supposed to, for the first episode, we were supposed to kind of give a background of how we got into King Crimson.
Oh, sure. Why don't you start?
Oh, boy.
Or maybe, actually...
Here. Why do I start? So
I was
I'm
actually...
going to be honest with you. Here I am saying that we need to talk about how we discovered this band, and to be honest with you, I don't really remember how.
So I actually think I'll then interject, because I remember. So for me, when I first got into King Crimson was hearing Court of the Crimson King, and I remember hearing randomly on Alice Cooper's radio show the song 21st Century Schizoid Man. I think that's the first time I'd ever heard King Crimson, and I can't remember if... I honestly want to say our mutual friend Matt bought In the Court of the Crimson King first, and I listened to it, or I like burnt a copy of it on CD. It was something like that. I remember Matt getting it around the same time that I first got it, and I remember listening to it and being really blown away by that first album. And then the mistake I made was listening to In the Wake of Poseidon next, which I don't think follows the first album very well. And I kind of didn't really...
Yeah, we talked about that in the last episode.
I kind of didn't really get into it for a while after that. And then, basically, I went on a website that you and I have both used called rateyourmusic.com. And I was reading about King Crimson, and for those who aren't familiar with the website, there's a lot of user voting and reviews and stuff. And they when you go onto a band's discography, you'll see in bold the albums that are basically the most well-regarded and well-reviewed, and Red was on there. And Red we'll be talking about a little later, but I decided to listen to that album, and that album made me go, wow. That was, to me, that album blew me away just as much, if not possibly more, than Court of the Crimson King. And then I started to dive into their discography after that. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but it was around when I discovered Red. I'm pretty sure I suggested to you that you listen to Red, and I think from that point on, you were really the only one of our group of friends that got as into King Crimson as I did. But I don't know if you remember me recommending
that sounds
Red to you.
like that definitely could be a possibility. I was thinking, though, as I was listening to your background, how you got into King Crimson. I feel like In the Court of the Crimson King was also the first one I heard. I know, thinking about it and just kind of giving a really quick and brief background of, I guess, my musical origins, if you will. When I was really getting into music in middle school, I was like kind of like every other teenage male as far as I'm concerned, and I really dived into classic rock. And Queen,
Same.
Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, they were really like my first bands, and then from there I was diving into other things. And as far as progressive rock goes, I think the first bands I really got into were Rush, Dream Theater, and Tool.
Yeah.
And once I really got into those three bands, that's when I really started discovering Rate Your Music and reading about what their influence were and really diving into progressive rock. And I want to say I probably got into King Crimson around the same time I got into bands like Yes and Genesis. But I wouldn't be surprised if you were initially the one that was like, you got to check out King Crimson. And I, for the life of me, I can't remember if In the Court of the Crimson King was the first one I heard or Red.
We might have all heard... We all might have heard Court around the same time. I recall us all listening to that around the same time and liking it.
That's probably accurate. I will say I do know that listening to Red, and I don't want to dive deep into Red yet because we're gonna talk about that album today's episode. But I do remember that Red was the one where they clicked for me. And I was
same
like
here.
You too, where I would from there I would use Rate Your Music as sort of like my guideline as to what albums to check out next. And I always kind of approached it with the highest rated ones. So from there, I checked out Discipline and Larks. I kind of saved some of the other ones, like In the Wake of Poseidon and Starless and Bible Black last, which in retrospect, and we'll talk about it more on our last episode of this series, I wouldn't recommend, at least for this band, approaching it that way.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that, actually, because you're right. Like you, I didn't really listen to a ton of their other stuff after Court and before Red. So, it was. I know it was around the same time that we listened to Red. I'm pretty sure I recommended Red to you. I think I remember doing that, but I remember us both being really into that album, like around the time that I listened to it, and us both kind of diving into King Crimson. And then, like, really and truly, King Crimson was the band, probably more than any other band, that you and I really bonded over, and probably King Crimson, maybe a band like Pink Floyd. Probably those were, maybe Pink Floyd, King Crimson, Rush, maybe those three bands more than anything.
Yeah, maybe, but I think King Crimson specifically for you and I, because I think at least with our sort of group of friends, I think both Rush and Pink Floyd are a little more universally loved, I guess, if you will. Whereas I think a band like King Crimson is definitely not for everyone. And not saying that some of our other friends are not into King Crimson. You mentioned our mutual friend Matt. I was just talking to him about King Crimson the other day, and he was talking about when he saw them live with you a few years ago. But I agree. I think you and I, out of anyone else I know, have a mutual love for this band. Hence why we started a podcast series. So there you go.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. So that was a kind of a good way to, I think, really kick this off because, and you're right, we should have done it in the first episode. But yeah, having our background, kind of explaining why basically our origins with this band and why we love this band and basically why we're doing this podcast, as you said. I mean, like you said, it was a no-brainer when you initially sort of pitched this to me. And you even said first band we should do for this discography series is King Crimson, and it made the most sense, so...
Yeah, and we talked about this briefly in the first episode. The timing really was just perfect. I mean, again, just the mutual love that we both have. It's the 50th anniversary of the band, the singles. I'm seeing them live in September. Like, the timing really just couldn't have been any better.
Oh, yeah, no question. Absolutely.
So, let's do this. Let's pick up where we last left off with King Crimson, and we can sort of use that as our segue into the next record that we're going to talk about. So
take it
where
away.
we last left off, Rob, was Islands. And so very interesting, because we had briefly mentioned the many hiatuses that this band goes on, and I thought the first one was actually in 1971, but that actually wasn't true. Doing a little bit more research, this lineup of the band did briefly tour. I mean, emphasis on briefly. And I guess Fripp just got to a point where he just wasn't satisfied with the band and the members in the band, and not where he saw the band going. So he immediately, mid-1972, I believe, completely disbanded the band. I was reading, I forgot to mention, I'm going to be using, I just picked up recently an Uncut magazine, which features King Crimson and the whole discography, side projects, you name it. And I guess when Fripp was in the midst of, disbanding the Islands band and putting together what ended up being the next classic era of the band, he did try to keep Mel Collins on. And I guess apparently, Mel Collins doesn't really go into it in the interview, but I guess at the time, not only could he not stay, but he was like, I guess, in tears and just fled it off. He was like, screw this, I can't work with you, which is, pretty funny because he's currently in the band.
Yeah, no kidding.
But Fripp was like, it's just time for a change, I want to play with the best of the best, and boy did he put together a band of the best of the best.
Yeah, no kidding, yeah. And it's interesting that I wanted to put just a little opinion in here. It's interesting that he was able to find such a great group of musicians for this record after having, like, really struggling for several years trying to have some kind of consistent lineup, and being desperate to the point where they had to teach Boz Burrell how to play bass on the last album, and he found, the members of the band that he did. It's I don't know if you read a bit more into that, if he got lucky or if he just took a little extra time to find people, or...
Well, so interesting enough, John Wetton, who of course is the vocalist and the bass player for these next three records that we're going to talk about in today's episode, did want to join the band around the Lizard Islands era, as did Fripp want, him to be in the band, and I guess the timing just wasn't there. I guess John Wetton had joined the band Family, which ended up being the band that he did eventually leave for when he did finally join King Crimson, but John Wetton did express wanting to be in King Crimson as far back as 1970, 1971. And then drummer Bill Bruford,
also... Go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was saying drummer Bill Bruford, who not only plays on these next three records, but will be, the drummer for the next several years of King Crimson. He was at a point too, of course, he came from the band Yes. They had just put out their magnum opus, Close to the Edge, and just as when Yes was getting ready to do the Close to the Edge tour, Bill Bruford was just like, I'm done. I feel like I've contributed everything I can to this band, and I need to do something where I can push myself forward. So very similar mindset to what Fripp had when he was trying to put this next incarnation of the band together.
Yeah, it was interesting watching Bill Bruford. I've seen a few interviews with him. I saw him on a Yes documentary, and I've also seen him on a Prog documentary. And it's interesting how he talked about how, like, it was such an interesting opinion of him to have, that he's like, well, I've pretty much done the best thing I could do in Yes, time to move on to another band. And he's, God, that guy's a hell of a drummer. Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. God, his drumming on these three records, man.
Yeah, I know.
So let's get into it. So Larks Tongues and Aspic, album number 5 with, ironically enough, Mark 5 of the band. This is literally, I was thinking about this in between episodes. There's a different lineup for every record up until this point.
Yeah, and the lineup. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying this next, I guess, phase of the band is much more consistent. I mean, we're going to talk about, you know, band members that, you know, left. And I mean, by the time we get to Red, it's down to a trio, but it's at least with the same people. So we're now starting to get some more consistency, but still, it's going to be another decade until we get a trilogy of albums with the same players in the band, if you will.
These three records are pretty much the most consistent the band had for a lineup up until this point, really. It's the first time that at least three of the musicians ended up being on three records in a row, which is kind of funny. It's the first time I think all three musicians ended up being on two albums in a row.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into it, man. So Larks Tongues and Aspic, released in 1973, once again through Island Records, and that's March 23rd specifically, 1973.
Yep.
We mentioned this is the debut of King Crimson's fifth incarnation, Mark V. This record peaked at number 20 on the UK charts and at number 61 in the US Billboard 200. Yes, that's my birds that you can hear in the background. I apologize for that. This mic literally picks up everything. We talked about the in-between, but old Frippo Pants here felt that the first four records were just too similar and that the band was starting to formulate this comfortable formula, hence why we have this new approach. And really, this record is really just, looking at the grand scheme of things of this band, is a very important one. I mean, this is really the one that set the tone for not only the next two records that we're going to talk about, but even in other incarnations of this band, they go back to this sound. I mean, I'm even talking the 80s era. They visit this sound. They full-blown cut back to the sound again on Thrack, Construction of Light, Power to Believe. So, like, this really is an important record for this band. I would argue,
as I said,
just as important as in the Court of the Crimson King.
I would agree, and as I was said in the last episode, I think this trilogy of albums, and particularly this album, is really where King Crimson as we know it was born. You know, the sound of the sound that kind of carries over every album after this, that is, you know, even in the, like you said, the 80s period is kind of a lot different. We'll be talking about that in the next podcast. But even some of this sound is retained during that period. It's very, I don't know if you'd agree with me there, but it's very, there's like some kind of core sound that is hard to describe that is unquestionably King Crimson that carries over, and everything they've done to this day, I think that reflects the sound in these three albums.
Well, I think, I forget who said it, where the quote came from, but in this Uncut magazine, somebody summarized the sound of this record perfectly. And he basically said, imagine Jimi Hendrix taking on Igor Stravinsky rather than Muddy Waters as his starting point, and the results would sound something like Larks Tongues and Aspic.
Yeah. Which, a little trivia for you, a funny little note here. Apparently Hendrix, before he died, was headed in kind of that direction, actually. Well, more like jazzy kind of prog influence. I don't know if you ever knew that, but apparently that's, like, he wanted to go in this kind of a direction, which is kind of an interesting little tidbit.
He went to a King Crimson concert pretty early in the band and was just in awe of Robert Fripp. And you know, I've always said, not to get too sidetracked here, but I've always said regarding Hendrix that, I mean, we never got to hear his peak. You know, as great as
I agree.
You know, those first few Hendrix Experience records are, as well as Band of Gypsies and some of that other live stuff. I mean, we never got to hear him at his peak, and I can't help but wonder, had he gone more into this, like, crimson-y jazz direction, if that would have been peak for him. You know, we'll never know, of course.
We'll never know. But anyway, sorry to sidetrack, but I just thought that was an interesting little factoid.
So, Rob, why don't you go ahead and introduce the band members, and then we'll get into it track by track.
Okay. The band members are, of course, Robert Fripp, the only consistent member since the first album, who plays guitars, mellotron, electric piano, and his devices. We know how much he loves his devices
Again.
We have John Wetton on bass, vocals, and he plays a little piano on this album on Exiles. He's you mentioned he's formerly from the band Family, and I can't remember if he was in Uriah Heep after King Crimson or before King Crimson, but I thought I mentioned that as well. He was in that band.
I think I remember reading that he was in Uriah Heep just shortly after, but just before him and Bruford formed UK.
Okay, good to know. And then, of course, speaking of Bruford, we have Bill Bruford, formerly of Yes, on drums. I apologize if I butcher this. Timbales, cowbell, and woodblock. Yeah, woodblock. We have David Cross, who does all the stringed instruments. So he does violin, viola. He also plays mellotron, electric piano, and he plays little flute on Exiles. We have Jamie Muir, Muir, whatever his name is.
Muir, I think.
On percussion, Muir, okay, on percussion, drums, all sorts, assorted found items, and sundry instruments. And then Richard Palmer James replaces Pete Sinfield for the first time doing all the lyrics on the album.
And we can get into it more when we talk about the next record, but Larks Tongues and Aspic is the only record where Jamie Muir plays. But I was reading that in that short time, he was such an influence on Bill Bruford's playing, especially moving forward with the next two records that we'll discuss in a little bit. But I thought that was an interesting little snippet. And it kind of, goes back to Bruford, why he left Yes in the first place and why he joined King Crimson, because he was looking to, push himself to that next level as a drummer. And it's cool that he points out that Jamie Muir, was, I guess, essentially really part of that further development in his playing.
Yeah, I actually remember hearing that as well. And Jamie, sorry, what is it, Muir?
Muir,
yeah. If you watch, there's a great video of, and I don't know if it's supposed to be like a promo video or what, of this lineup playing Larks, Tongues, and Aspic. You can find it on YouTube. And he really, really shines in this. He's kind of a wild man on stage. It's fascinating watching him play.
Yeah, no, I know which clip you're talking about. I was just watching that the other day too.
Yeah.
And the other point I just wanted to make before we dive in here is, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. Richard Palmer James, so much better in my opinion than Peter Sinfield. I mean, I know we talked about the last episode about his lyrics and we had some differing opinions on that. I tend to lean more towards Sinfield's philosophical lyrics, but he kind of got a little more mystical, if you will, on a little bit on In the Wake of Poseidon, but really on Lizard specifically. To me, Palmer James, he kind of reminds me of more of the philosophical Sinfield, if you will, and I like the consistency with these lyrics on these three records. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think he's just as good as Pete Sinfield, really. Because Pete Sinfield has some, when he hits his highs, he really hits his highs. Like a song like Epitaph has probably my favorite lyrics of any King Crimson song, honestly. But you're definitely right that at least over the last couple of albums, there's certainly the quality of lyrics is a lot better. Although there's a couple songs that I'm not a fan of in the next album in terms of lyrics, but we'll get there.
Okay, yeah. So let's dive right in. So let's start with, of course, side 1, track 1, Larks, Tongues, and Aspic, part 1. I go back and I think about that interview where Fripp talks about, radically wanting to change the band, and boy, does this song showcase that. Holy moly.
Yeah, no kidding. This is definitely one of the strongest, one of the high points of the album for me. And I would also say it might possibly be my favorite opening track on a King Crimson album.
I would
just
probably have to
go ahead.
agree with that. At least up until Red. For sure, this would be my favorite album opener as well. I mean, this song, oh my god. I mean, like, it borders jazz, classical, dare I say, even like proto-heavy metal.
Yes.
A little side note, we talked about, when we were talking about islands on the last episode, one of the bonus tracks I mentioned was a peacemaking stint on Rolls, and I had mentioned that it sounded like a little bit of Larks Tongues and Aspic. Well, I did some further research in between, and it turns out that was an early version of that song.
Oh wow. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah,
I guess
you can go and listen to it sometime, but you can definitely hear snippets of the first Larks Tongues and Aspect. But yeah, I just wanted to confirm that, because, like I said, when I was listening to it, that I was like, this kind of sounds like an early take of that song, and surely enough, it was.
There's I love the slow build in the beginning of the song, and the percussion in like the very light percussion in the beginning. I don't know what it is that he's playing there. I don't know if that's the let me see. I don't know if it's like that wood block or if it's something. It's a very light. It almost sounds like a xylophone, and
it almost sounds like a combination of the wood block and the timbales as well.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
I will say, and I'll tell you, I with these 3 records, I love David Cross's violin playing. I really do.
Same here.
My only thing with this song is parts of the violin, especially towards the end of the song, I would trim down a little bit. If you listen to some live versions of this song during the 72-74 part, they do trim a lot of that out. And a lot of that had to do with because, well, he left the frickin' band, I think around 73. But that would be my only thing. And I'm just nitpicking at this point. But I feel that some of the violin parts with this song specifically, they just don't go anywhere. But all in all, this is a fantastic track.
Oh yeah, it's so epic too, and it's there's the guitar riffing in it is amazing. Like you said, it's almost like a proto metal kind of sound. There like that whole build up to the very first riff is it's fantastic. I absolutely love it.
It really is, and I mean, and we got samples throughout the first 4 records. I mean, Schizoid Man, Pictures in a City, Sailor's Tale, of like that heavy Fripp guitar chomping, but it's full blown starting with this record, and it's just it's killer. This song's amazing.
yeah. I kind of wish I had it on right now.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna stop doing that now.
And the bass, Wetton's bass throughout all these albums really is very heavy, very like low end, like bottom, like boom, just very very crunchy, and I don't know how to describe the sound, just very low bass sounding and very very heavy.
I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. This is the first time where old Frippo Pants, here we go, has a band. Like, this band, I guess what I'm trying to say is this is the first time where... I'm trying to figure out how I want to say this. This is the first time where I feel that this is, like, the most in sync this band has ever sounded. I'm gonna even say over the first incarnation of the band. I really am. I mean, especially, and we're gonna hear it more on Red when it's just Fripp, Wetton, and Bruford. But like, it's like these guys were always meant to be in a band together.
Yeah, it's a very well-oiled machine, and it's also kind of amazing considering it's probably about a year or so between this and Islands, and you had a band that was completely in disarray, and then comes back full force with a really killer lineup. One of the best,
for sure.
In my opinion, one of the best, if not the best lineups as well. It's between this, I would say, the original lineup and another lineup that we haven't gotten to yet, but those three are right up there with each other in my opinion. You have just the chemistry between the musicians is fantastic, and up to this point, I would also say this is the most technically proficient band as well.
Oh,
which,
without a doubt,
yeah.
without a doubt. And I mean, and this band on subsequent records is going to have some other like amazing musicians that are just some of the best of the best. But with up until this point, this is without a doubt the best of the best.
I agree.
I do. And you know, this is my favorite era of the band as of now. Going into the next track, Book of Saturday, and actually really the next two tracks, Book of Saturday and Exiles. And I love Wetton's vocals on these next two tracks. Part of me wonders what they would sound like with Greg Lake on vocals.
I have to say, Wetton is my favorite King Crimson singer. I don't think he's a bad singer. I think he's kind of middle of the road in terms of all of their singers. His vocals lend itself really well to a lot of the heavier tracks. But some of the lighter tracks I would have liked maybe a bit like either a different singer or I don't know. He's not bad. I just think it would have been better with maybe a different singer, somebody who's a little bit better with ballads. But I do like his songs, especially on the heavier tracks and especially on Red. I think it's the perfect voice.
And I will say I think he's the best singer up until this point since Greg Lake. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know my feelings with Gordon Haskell and Bose Burrell. But I do agree with you. I think when it comes to the ballads, it doesn't get better than Greg Lake. I will say, though, Book of Saturday, this is a great song. I think this is
a nice little piece.
The perfect song to come off of what was the over-the-top, bombastic, heavy, hard-hitting Larks Tongues and Aspic Part 1. This is just a good palate cleanser. This is just a beautiful track.
Yes, it is. I actually really like this track too. It's nice to follow the kind of chaotic heaviness of the first track, and I mean the first track is pretty long as well, so you have a nice shorter little ballad, and it I also think it works well. Like I said, I'm not 100% on the vocals, but I still really love the song. So
well, you know, the vocals have grown on me. I think for some of the more ballady tracks, they work out better than others. I mean, I think Wetton personally, not to get ahead, but I think he nails it on the next track. But we'll talk about more of that in a second. But, you know, listening to Book of Saturday, it's just so introspective sounding. Could be a love song, not really sure, but this is what I really like about Richard Palmer James. Is lyrics, is I find that, and we talked about lyrics not really be neither one of our, you know, biggest priorities when it comes to the music that we really like. But when I do focus on lyrics, my favorite lyricists do tend to be the ones where their lyrics are open for interpretation. There's not a definitive meaning to what they're trying to convey.
I always like that with any band, really, too. I mean, and it seemed like that was a lot more of a thing back then, too, to have these kind of philosophical and, well, not even just philosophical, really, most, like, even if you think of a band like, like Pink Floyd or something, even their lyrics are so open to interpretation as well, and I always like lyrics like that are kind of open-ended, and whoever listens to the song could interpret them differently. I always really like that when it comes to lyrics, and I definitely agree with you that a song like Book of Saturday and a few others on here have lyrics that are, I would definitely describe the lyrics in that way. Although again, for me the lyrics missed me on this a little bit, only because the musicianship is what I kind of pay attention to. This is certainly an album, in my opinion, for that. So I always kind of get lost in the music first, and the lyrics come second. Always happens.
Yeah, and I see what you mean, and I think with this song and the next track, Exiles, I mean, here we are talking about the musicianship and, you know, the technical side, and like especially with like the, you know, instrumentals, but let's not forget about the instrumentation. Here we go with the ballads too. I mean, even with
Yes.
the more ballady stuff, it's top-notch playing. I mean, these two songs, I get just as lost in this whole record. I just
Yep.
get completely lost in. Whether it's the heavier, bombastic moments or even just like the more subtle moments.
The light. It's again the balance between light and dark, and in some ways the lighter songs are there's a subtle complexity to them, which is in a lot of ways, and as much as I love the heavy bombastic side of King Crimson and other bands, I also like subtle intricacy as well, because it's neat when you can hear a song that kind of is more accessible, but you can, if you have the right ear for it, you can really hear how layered the song is. And there's something about that subtlety in musicianship that I really appreciate as well. Sometimes more so even than the whole like, hey, get a load of this. Look at us just look how great musicians we are, and let's show off a little bit kind of thing, you know. So I don't know, I like that.
And that's like what this band is quite frankly known for. But like they do have that subtle side, and this record for sure showcases that. And that's a really good segue to our next track, which closes side 1, track 3, Exiles. This is one of my favorite King Crimson songs.
This is probably my favorite song on the album, and
it's mine too.
Yeah.
My favorite song on the record, and I think up to this point, it's KC's prettiest song without a doubt. I think this song blows "I Talk to the Wind Out of the Water," "Cadence and Cascade." Like this is just. And we talked about how underrated Fripp's acoustic playing is on the last episode, and we get it again. And really, this record, out of like this incarnation of the band, is really the only record we get that acoustic playing. It's not really showcased at all on the next 2 albums. I did it again. Albums.
The next few records.
The next 2 records.
You'll get it, don't worry. But yeah, I agree. This was a standout track to me, and this is one. When I listen to this again to just blow smoke up Steven Wilson a little bit. This was another one when I heard this. The version that I'm so used to listening to of this album is not very good. It was the 30th anniversary remasters, I guess. Mm-hmm. And when I listened to this and I heard Exiles, I really think the beauty of this song opened up to me for the first time. And I just love the light, like you said. The acoustics in this are just absolutely fantastic. There's some great keyboard and piano work in it. I love it.
Yeah, I think, we talked about again on the last episode how muddy sounding the 30th anniversary editions of these records sounded. And I think these 3 records especially really benefited from the Steven Wilson remasters.
Yes. I
think what maybe at the time was a highlight for a record like Red was how muddy it sounded. It almost sounded like a proto-grunge record. But on the flip side of that, I know at the time, around the 30th anniversaries, I was not into songs like Book of Saturday and Exiles because they just sounded so flat to me. So now hearing these again on the 40th anniversaries, these are becoming some of the more standout tracks for these records for me. I mean, this song especially.
Yes.
I mean, I probably would have said that this was my least favorite track 5 years ago, and now going back and revisiting this era of the band, it's become my favorite. And I gotta commend Mr. Wilson just bringing out the sounds on some of these tracks. So good. But this song as a whole
great.
Has an amazing balance of the instrumentation. I mean, it's primarily a ballad, but there are some heavy moments throughout, and this is just a great song.
You pretty much summed up my feelings on it. This was one of those moments when I listened to this album, I was like, this is totally. It kind of peaked here for me, and I was like, I'm glad because I would agree with you that it didn't stand out to me as much before listening to this version of it, and then I was like, well, I'm glad I'm a fan of the next side of the album too, because this might have kind of peaked a little too soon for me in the album, if I hadn't heard the album so many times before. But yeah, I love this track. It's undoubtedly my favorite. Also, we should mention David Cross does some excellent work on that track as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, God,
the flute and everything.
For this track, David Cross and Fripp are the highlights of this song for sure.
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah.
And again, I part of me is like, really, what the only thing that could make this song better is if Greg Lake sang it. And I will say, I do think John sounds fantastic on this song compared to some of the other ballads. But that would be the only thing that would make this track better, is what if Greg Lake sang it.
Yeah, the ballads just aren't his strong suit, and that's fine. I don't think he's a bad vocalist. I just think, like I said, if Greg Lake did it, or even Gordon Haskell. I mean, I like Gordon Haskell's vocals on Cadence and Cascade, if it was something like that, or even really, like, honestly, I think to give credit where it's due too, like, even Boz sang Islands, which is, I think, a really lovely track too. But yeah, I guess you can't. He was just the vocalist at the time, and he still did a really good job. I don't think it takes away from the song at all, or Book of Saturday at all. I just wish he was. I don't know what it is. I wish they had a little bit better of a singer for the ballads.
Yeah, those, going back to the the Hendrix thing, sometimes you just can't help but think about those what if scenarios.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm looking at just the entire track listing of this record, and as we transition to side 2, this is a very well sequenced record. I talked about in the first episode that I really, even with newer music, I have, when it comes to track sequencing, I have the vinyl format in my head. You have side 1 that has a strong opener with Larks, and then you have a great closer with Exiles, and then side 2 opens with another banger, Easy Money.
Yep. They played this one live when I saw them. Actually, they played, I might be wrong here, but I think they played all of side 2 when I saw them live, looking at the track listing.
That's
not in order, but
amazing, because this is a mighty side 2. It really is.
Yeah, it is.
This song.
It is. Don't get me wrong. What I was saying when we were talking about Exiles, that side 2 is bad or anything. I really love side 2, but I'm just saying I'm kind of glad that I appreciated Exiles after the fact, because it might have peaked there initially, and I might have been like, well, but Exiles was so good,
Now going back and listening to this record the past few weeks, and the 40th anniversary remaster. Both of these sides are equally great. Whereas a couple years ago, I would have said to you, all Larks Tongues and Aspic Part 1 aside, but side 2, of course, blows side 1 out of the water. But now I've really grown a new appreciation for Book of Saturday and Exiles.
Yeah, same here. I would definitely
let's
agree.
talk about Easy Monies. I mean, this track is a funky, jammy, borderline swagger. I mentioned when we talked about Islands that Ladies of the Road was, although not one of my favorite songs, was kind of like their Led Zeppelin song. Well, so is this song, but blows Lady of the Road out of the water as far as I'm concerned. I love this song.
Yeah, it's weird to hear a King Crimson song, and there's only a handful of them really, unless maybe if you get into the '80s era a little bit. But it's kind of got a good hook, Easy Money. It's weird to hear a King Crimson song with a hook like that.
Yeah, and, I was thinking when listening to this song and a couple other songs on the next 2 records, because they didn't have a backing vocalist in the band, so I guess I'm gonna assume that it's John Wetton doing all the vocals, including some of the overdubs and the chorus of this song and the chorus of the Great Deceiver. One More Red Nightmare is another one. Because I don't think anyone else in this band sang, but this is really the first time in King Crimson where we have songs that have not only choruses but really good ones too, catchy.
Well, I mean, it makes sense then that John Wetton ended up later on in the '80s joining Asia, and Asia is essentially like an AOR kind of pop rock band, and
Asia,
catchy hooks.
right. Yeah, I forgot he was in Asia. Yeah,
catchy hooks. I think Wetton brought that to the table a little bit, just a little bit on some of these albums.
Yeah, for sure. And this next track, the Talking Drum, this is where we really start to dive into the avant-garde side of the band that I do like. I was very nitpicky with, parts of Moonchild and, the Devil's Triangle and, a couple other tracks from the first 4 records. But this is really where I think it starts to work with this band. And I think, that's a testament to the additional band members that are, I guess in this lineup of the band. I love the climatic
Bruford and Muir really
shine
shine
of this song. And
yeah,
I mean, this one, it's almost like Fripp kind of takes a seat back a little bit. And this is really like, this track is for Wetton, Bruford, and Muir to just shine. Like, here we are, we're now in King Crimson, and we are here to stay. That doesn't really last very long, but that's sort of like my feelings towards this song. What do you think?
If you're a rhythm person, drummer, bass player, whatever, this is like essential because first of all, I think you're absolutely right. Like Wetton and especially Bruford and Muir, like they just take it away on this song. I mean, it's this the percussion in this is like really, really good. Some of the best percussion of any King Crimson song, I think. And yeah, there's definitely a build up in this song as well, kind of like in Larks Tongues and Aspic Part 1, but a bit different. And I don't know what to say. I really like this track. This is some of the best musicianship on the album, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And we gotta talk about that scream at the end that transitions into the closing track, which is of course Larks Tongues and Aspic Part 2.
Yeah,
I'm curious. I was trying to do some research. What is, I guess, what is that sound coming from? Like, what is projecting that scream? Is that a specific instrument? Is that one of the band members? I mean, it doesn't sound like a human being projecting that scream, but
I wonder if it's David Cross doing something on.
That's an interesting
something
one.
Like
that does sound like that could come off of a violin, actually.
Yeah, violin or something, or viola, or even like a stand-up bass or some kind of weird thing like that.
But what a great transition from the talking drum to Larks Tongues and Aspic Part 2, which...
Yep.
Hey, what a way to close. I keep referring to the first episode, but I talked about again, having a strong opener and a strong closer, and God, does this song really close, man? I mean, it definitely has similar themes to Larks Tongues and Aspect Part 1. I would say it's maybe a little bit more riff-oriented, but this song is just
if I could
awesome.
just say top 3 King Crimson riff songs, I've just thrown 3 out there just because I can't think off the top of my head. Maybe something like Schizoid Man would be up there, or other ones, but I love the riff. Dan and nan and nan and nan and nan. Yup, it's like just crashing and it just builds and builds. Builds. It sounds.
When thinking about favorite Crimson songs, I find myself just cheating a little bit and really just clumping Part 1 and Part 2 together, because I can't even decide, if I like Part 1 better than Part 2 or like Part 2 better. So I just.
That's what I was about to ask you.
I cheat and clump them
I was about to be a douche and be like, all right, Andrew, here's the real test. Is Larks, Tongues, and Aspic Part 1 or 2 better? So I think the answer is that, so if these 2 songs were reversed, if Part 2 was the opening track for the album and Part 1 was the closing track for the album, it wouldn't work at all. These 2 are designed to be opening and closing tracks on an album, as far as I'm concerned.
But on the flip side of that, I can almost you just brought that up. I can almost see Part 2 opening the record and Part 1 closing. Like, I think that you could intertwine these tracks.
Interesting. It'd be interesting to do, and I've never done, is to listen to make up a playlist and put Part 1 and 2 side by side. Like, just play one and then play 2 right after, and then maybe reverse it and do that as well and see how it sounds.
Well, I'll tell you one thing I am very much looking forward to doing is when we complete this series is making a playlist of just all 5 of the Larks Tongues pieces.
Yes.
Because, of course, and I guess we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but there are 3 more parts to this, I guess, suite, if you want to call it. Part 3,
Yes.
Of course, is on 3 of a Perfect Pair. Part 4 is broken up into several individual pieces on the Construction of Light. And then Part 5, which is actually called Level 5, is on the Power to Believe.
Yes. Great track, by the way. Also, if we do our Spotify playlist at the end and we have all the Larks, Tongues, and Aspic tracks on it, we should put them all in order and at the very end of the playlist.
That's a good idea, actually.
It is, yeah.
So
yeah.
go ahead.
What do you think? Overall thoughts on this album?
Overall thoughts. So, and one thing
And we
I
could
should
rank
say
our
really
favorite
quick
tracks.
is this is really the first one where we don't really have any bonus tracks or B-sides. Even looking at the 40th anniversary, all the bonus stuff were just alternate takes or live renditions. But as far as my final thoughts, Rob, on this record, to me, up to this point of the band, this record is the most cohesive King Crimson record, and that's even over in the Court of the Crimson King. I'm not getting to the debate of it being better, but just simply to me as a whole piece, it's the most cohesive that this band has put out up until this point.
I think it's a fair assessment, especially like King's Court of the Crimson King is also a good contender, but that part in the middle and end of Moonchild kind of makes that it's kind of a bit of a slip up in my opinion as well with the first album. So I could totally see what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. With that being said, though, despite being the most cohesive record, this is not one that I would recommend as a starting point. I think this one's a little bit challenging to the ears. This is definitely not an accessible record. I mean, it's a very rewarding one, and it's definitely among, to me at least, the band's best, like one of the best. But it's not one that I would say, okay, you want, and this is going back to me kind of making the point of rate your music, not always starting with the highest rating records, because this is not one that I would say as an introduction to the band. I mean, I think this would be one that would turn most people off. You know what I mean?
Unless you're like a hardcore prog fan, or even I would even say if you like heavy music, if you're like kind of a metal, like really into metal hard rock, and you'll like mess with prog, this is kind of a nice.
Like if you're like
this
a
would
really
be a good
big metal
album,
guy, like especially like 80s thrash and speed metal, whatever you want to call that. Like, oh well, you really like this? Well, listen to this. You'll be surprised. Or even if like you're also a big jazz guy as well too. I would say, you're, this is a rock band that like you can put, amongst the reins of of jazz, quite frankly. Or like you said too, if you're a really big progressive rock, nerd, which, as far as I'm concerned, if you're a big prog nerd, how have you not heard this record? But, aside from that, if you're, someone that's listening to this podcast series and, hopefully, once we're done with this, like we've gotten some people into this band, looking at it from that point of view, I would not say that this would be the first one to start with.
No, not by any means. I would say at least I think anybody would agree that Court would probably be the place to start, and then from there maybe possibly one of the other, maybe something like Islands, or even I don't know if we want to move on to Red or not.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
this
I
is
think,
this is
as
a
far
couple
as
albums
starting
in.
point goes, I would say, I really think In the Court of the Crimson King is a great place to start. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get too ahead of where to start with the band. I kind of want to save that for the last episode, but
I'll say for myself that this wasn't an instant like love affair for me, like something like Red was. But you're absolutely right that once you get into it, it's very rewarding. There's a lot that this album has to offer. So especially listening to the Steven Wilson remix and hearing the beauty that is a track like Exiles, and I also think watching that performance of Larks Tongues and Aspic part 1 was also a turning point for me with this record as well. Whenever I first watched it, which was quite a few years ago now, and seeing the actual musicianship of like watching the musicians actually play the song and seeing how intricate the piece is. Yeah, I don't know. It's if you listen with very if you have very intuitive ears, you're gonna be very rewarded by this album. And to me, this is also one where I don't think this album gets too jammy and boring. They pull it off really well.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, as we pointed out before, even though, yeah, this is a very jammy record, there's other offerings. There's some of the more ballady stuff with Book of Saturday and Exiles, but this really, again, it's very cohesive sounding. We're again showing off like this is the new band. We are the best of the best, but it's not just that over the top playing. This is just a great record. Bottom line.
It really is. Shall we do our top threes and
Let's
then move on?
Let's do our top three because we do need to move on. I guess I'll go ahead and go first. For me, it would be my favorite track I said before was Exiles. I'm going to go ahead and cheat and just clump Larks Tongues and Aspect 1 and 2 together as my second favorite, and then my third favorite being Easy Money.
I think for me it would honestly be the same if we were to if I was to lump the two together. If I didn't lump the two together, it would be the two Larks pieces and it would be Exiles as number 1. But I'm tempted to say Talking Drum might ease out Easy Money just by a hair for me. So I think if I had to pick a third one, maybe I'll go Talking Drum.
Nice. And Talking Drum's great. So
but by a hair. I mean, they're both great.
You can't really argue with that. This was definitely a harder one to rank compared to some of the other ones. But let's go ahead and move on to
I definitely agree with
Starless and Bible Black. And we are back. Sorry about that. I'm just going to go ahead and say it, Rob. We both needed to take a potty break.
I am very well hydrated.
I don't know if hydrated's the word I would use, more so just high on caffeine, but we won't get into that right now. All right, so moving on. Next record here, record, album, CD, vinyl, not CD, because CDs did not exist during this time. Number 6, Starless and Bible Black, released in March 1974 by Island Records in the UK and by Atlantic Records in the United States. Much of the material on this one was recorded live, but edited and blended with studio material. The Larks Tongues tour was huge, and the band only had 3 days off before starting this record.
Wow.
The mood was very sour, and you kind of hear that a little bit on this one. Oh, and by the way, that Muir guy, Jamie Muir, fucking quit the band and decided he was going to be a monk. So that happened too.
Nice.
So you want to introduce the band members?
Well, minus him, the rest of the band is still present. So you have Robert Fripp on guitar, mellotron, devices, electric piano and production. You have John Wetton on bass, vocals, and production. Bill Bruford on drums, percussion, and production, and David Cross on violin, viola, mellotron, electric piano, and production, and Richard Palmer James returns with the lyrics. So
this record very much is especially when we're talking about these three, very much the underdog.
Yeah.
I will say that, yes, my opinion hasn't changed in the sense where ranking these three, it would be my number 3. However, I have very much have grown an appreciation for this one, and can't help but wonder as to how high it will be in my final ranking when we get to that, but not to get too far ahead of ourselves.
Interesting.
I also, when I think about this episode and the next few, we've kind of clumped them into trilogies.
Mm-hmm.
This era of the band, these 3 records, it really is a trilogy.
Yes.
This one, to me, definitely picks up where Larks Tongues left off, but pushes those boundaries even further. What do you think?
Yeah, I think to kind of go off of what you were saying there about where this stands between the 3 albums, this one has the unfortunate issue of being wedged between 2 like titans as far as I'm concerned, as far as King Crimson's discography. And this was what I always kind of I would say I kind of have a similar opinion to you now than I did, and that is that this was one I overlooked a lot. And I think, especially again, after listening to the Steven Wilson version, I have a new appreciation for this record as well.
Same.
But I would still say it's the weakest of the 3.
I agree, although I'm not sure if weakest would be the word I would use, but I get what you're saying. And yeah, definitely when comparing them to the other 2, sure, it is the weakest, but there's some great stuff on this. And let's just dive right into it.
Sure.
Side 1, track 1, The Great Deceiver. Oh man, this is like 21st Century Schizoid Man, Pictures in a City. This is a hard-hitting opener. It almost sounds like it's like a battle going on between Fripp and David Cross with that guitar and violin. This song's awesome. I love it.
This is where we might differ. I'm still not quite a fan of the song, and it's not anything to do with the instrumentation. I'm not a fan of the lyrics, really. I don't know why, they just don't work for me. There's something... that's part of the problem I had with this album is, for some reason, the first track I still can't get into. I don't know if I just need to listen to the album more, but this was one for me that it's something about the lyrics, and I'm not even really a huge fan of the chorus and the melody of it, but it's not terrible either. I'm not saying it's a bad song. It doesn't, for some reason, that one misses the mark with me.
Sure, and let's briefly talk about the lyrics, actually. Okay. The song opens up with the line, health, food, faggot, which, just on a side note, does not relate to homosexuality whatsoever. And really listening to this track a few times, I kind of interpret it as a jab at sort of like the meatheads of the music industry, if you will. I mean, it's pretty much legend if you are a fan of this band that,
yeah.
Fripp has, a very huge issue
Beef.
with the music industry, even during this time. But I gotta tell you, I love the chorus of this song. I really do. And a little side note, the chorus, the cigarettes, ice cream, figurines of the Virgin Mary, Robert Fripp's only sole lyrical contribution to the band.
That's so random.
Very random.
Any idea what he thinks of this song these days, or no?
I don't, but I think it does. They do play it, I believe. I think I've seen it on 1 or 2 of some of the more recent live albums that they've released. I could be wrong, but I don't know, to be honest with you. But I love it. I really do. I think it's a great track.
I think, again, this has a bit of the cat food thing that you were talking about in the last one for me, where I like it instrumentally a lot, but there's something about the lyrics I'm not a fan of. I can't quite put my finger on why.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point too. And look, this is definitely from a lyrical standpoint, not some of the band's best lyrics. And I don't know if it's just John Wetton's delivery of the song.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Why it doesn't bother me to the extent of Cat Food's lyrics, because I mean, I went on my rant about how that was just borderline laughable lyrics, and really some of these lyrics.
Yeah.
But I don't know if just Wetton's approach kind of makes it work for me. I'm not really too sure, but I see where you're coming from. For some reason, with this song as opposed to Cat Food, it just works for me for whatever reason.
Yeah, I definitely will say again though, I like the track a lot more after hearing the remix again than I did originally. So that helped me a lot when I was listening to this album. Actually, I kind of listened for the instrumentation a little bit more, and it made me enjoy the track more for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So let's move on to track two. Track two is Lament, and this one really grew on me. This one kind of, going back to our conversation about Book of Saturday and Exiles, same thing. This one I really thought was just brought to light with this 40th anniversary remaster of the album. I don't even remember what my opinion was of this song. I don't even think I've listened to this record, to be honest with you, maybe once prior to doing this show. But this might be a contender for my favorite, if not second favorite.
Yeah, this was a good track. This was I thought it transitioned well from The Great Deceiver, and I don't know. I like you wrote. I'm looking at your notes, and you wrote that it's a melancholy reflection. I think that sums up the vibe of this song very well. You know, I don't really know what I could say really beyond that, and it's probably the first track that I really truly enjoyed while I was listening to this album. Where I will say for me, the back half of this album, I would say, I don't know if it's technically side B. Actually I have the vinyl right in front of me. Let's see. Side B would be, side B is actually literally Starless and Bible Black and Fracture. So about midway through side one,
those two songs, right?
About midway through side one is where this album really picks up for me, I would say. But this was the high point for this part of the album for me. I actually really enjoyed Lament.
Yeah, no, this is a great track, and I love, again, kind of like Exiles, where it switches from that ballady to, heaviness. This one, I mean, there are parts where it gets really funky, and I think Wettin is the one that shines on this track. I mean, he rips on both the vocals and the bass on this song. This is a great one, and I think this is some of Richard Palmer James' best lyrics too. This is a great track.
I agree with what you were saying about definitely with on both points, but yeah, Wetton's bass on this album he does some amazing bass playing, by the way. Really fantastic stuff. He might be King Crimson's best bass player, possibly. There's a couple contenders there, but he's very, very good.
Yeah, for sure. That's a tricky one, I think. Definitely up to this point, he's the band's best bass player, but
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe that's something we should do on the last episode too. We should rank the different players, like the best guitar player, bass player, drummer, etc. For this band, I think that would be interesting to do because they've had so many band members over the years.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I digress. I don't want to get too off, especially
given
ahead. The time here.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to track 3. We'll Let You Know. And this is the first instrumental on this record. And, I mean, there's really not a lot to say about this one. It's one of the entirely improvised pieces on this. It was specifically recorded in Glasgow. It's cool, I guess. It's definitely, again, very funky. But really not a whole lot to say. I mean, the band definitely has better instrumentals. I will say I kind of hate this and another track that we'll talk about in a second. I kind of hate how just abruptly it cuts off.
I don't like it either. I thought there was something wrong with the with the track when I was listening to it. I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, me too. But what are your thoughts about this one?
You're kind of echoing my thoughts on that one. It's kind of, again, middle of the road. Nothing really special. I also didn't like that it cut off abruptly. It's kind of funky a little bit. And I don't really know what else to say. It's also a pretty short track. It's one of the shortest tracks. It is the shortest track on the album.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those interlude pieces,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Again, it's fine. There's nothing, there's not really anything I dislike about it, but it's, again, it's not one of their best instrumentals either. Let's move on to the next piece.
The next piece. Oh no. Never mind. I'm getting ahead of myself. The Night Watch for me is where this album, I will say, starts to really pick up for me. I really enjoyed this track.
Interesting, and really,
yeah.
I think this is the first record where we have the
Differing
most,
opinion.
I guess, differing opinions, because this is actually my least favorite on the album.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah. Again, it grew on me. Whereas the first couple listens, I just kind of dismissed it altogether. But yeah, I don't know. This one just doesn't really do anything for me. I think it's interesting. The song is, of course, about the painting the Night Watch. And just a little interesting fun fact about this one too. I guess this one was originally a live recording, and I guess the Mellotron broke down at the start of the track, so they did have to do some studio overdubbing for this one. But I don't know. I feel like this one just doesn't really go anywhere.
I like this track. I don't know why it stood out to me first. I really like it instrumentally. The lyrics are kind of cool. I don't know. It was I don't know what it was about this piece, to be honest. Like, I could totally see why you don't like it. I just thought I like the guitar in it. I don't know. There's something the way that I don't know. I really don't know how to describe it. For some reason, this was the song that just kind of clicked with me initially, and then I felt the album just kept getting better and better as the next couple songs came on. Although I will say the next piece, Trio, is probably the highlight of the whole album for me, to be quite honest.
Definitely one of the highlights, and I will say, sorry, I just banged into my mic there. I will say, it blows my mind that this is an improv piece.
That I didn't know that Trio is an improv piece. Really,
it is. Yeah, and full improv. There wasn't really any studio overdubs for this one. And, like this is like they're like entering classical territory on this track. And just a little fun fact about this one: the reason why this song is called Trio is, of course, if you've listened to the song, it's really, it only consists of violin, mellotron, and bass. Fripp is the one playing the mellotron, by the way. When the band first played this one live, Bill Bruford spent the entire time just sitting with his drumsticks crossed over his chest, waiting for the right moment to come in. Because again, this is an improv piece. And eventually he just kind of came to the realization that as the song was progressing, it was better off without him. So when the band brought this track to the studio, he still received writing credit because the band realized that he made a crucial choice by not playing the track. And because of that, he still gets a co-writing credit for the song.
Hey, honestly, I really like that, because sometimes not playing is just as important as playing, you know? Or even leaving space in a song.
And a guy like Bill Bruford, who, let's face it, is one of the greatest rock drummers, you know, and for a top-notch player like that to be like, you know what?
I gotta step aside, I
gotta not, sit in on this one. Like, this doesn't need drums. Like, that's awesome as far as I'm concerned. But I thought that was a really interesting backstory. But yeah, I mean, this song, it blows my mind that this is an improv piece. Definitely a highlight.
I didn't know that. That makes me like the song even more. And I will say, David Cross is he is the absolute, like, this might be one of, if not the song that he shines on the most from this period. I love his playing on this piece.
Yeah, I would say this and Starless on the next record are like the two where he really shines.
He's it's a really, really incredible piece. And I don't know what it is. This one really just did it for me, and to me, it's the high point of the album. And the fact now that I know, I'm gonna go back and listen to that today. Now that I know that was an improv, and I think that really blows my mind. I had no idea.
So let's move on to track 6, which closes side 1 or side A, whatever you want to call it, and that's the Mincer. And I have to take back with what I said about the Night Watch being my least favorite track. It's actually this one that's my least favorite. And so this song, there's a little bit of legend behind it as well. So when the band originally played this one, and this is another improv piece, even the lyrics, John Wetton's lyrics to this song are improvised. I guess this song, the tape just abruptly cut out. So there's a whole like almost like 10 minutes of this missing. And if you listen to David Singleton's 50th anniversary commentary for this one, on the Great Deceiver box set, which he and Robert Fripp put out in 1991, I think, they came across a bootleg of this show, and they were able to take the missing pieces of this track, and actually the missing piece is called The Law of Maximum Distress, which is a very fitting title, because taking this bootleg quality and, editing into the rest of the mincer, I guess he was saying, was a challenge in of itself. But so really it's missing a whole 10 minutes. So combined, now called the mincer / the Law of Maximum of Distress, which I don't know if you've listened to the full version, but the full version, it's a much better song. Like I wish that, we had received the full version on the original record. But because the technology wasn't there and the tape, just completely crapped out a couple minutes into the song, I almost wish they didn't include the mincer on it all. I hate how it just abruptly, which again isn't their fault, but how it just abruptly ends and it goes into Starless and Bible Black. Like I almost wish you had taken it out altogether. What do you think?
I kind of agree with that, because I actually really liked the song, but I hate that it cut out early. That was my main issue with it. I'm like, this song didn't really go anywhere, and I was actually really enjoying it, and then all of a sudden it stopped. Yeah.
But if you get a chance, listen to the whole version, the mincer / the Law of Maximum Distress. It's a great song. It's another just great Casey improv piece, but because technology in 1974 happened and the tape cut off, this is what we got. And I just, again, I wish they just kind of didn't even include it all together, but what are you gonna do? That's that.
Yeah, pretty much. I think you're absolutely right. I think they shouldn't have even bothered, because I actually personally think this album could have stood to be a little shorter anyway, and that taking that track out probably would have been a good idea. I mean, that abrupt ending really is rather jarring for this, and what was it? We'll Let You Know, I think it was, also ends, right?
Yeah.
I don't like that. I don't like that they just cut out. It's very jarring when you're trying to listen to the album as a piece, Yeah,
no, I agree. So. I would have been, like I said, fine with them taking this one out altogether, and just really not really replacing with anything. I'm fine with this one being a little shorter. But let's go.
But I have to say,
go ahead.
I was gonna say my last thought on that was I did really enjoy the piece. I just wish it had been the full version. So now I'm gonna have to go listen to the full version. Yeah,
listen to the full version, because I think the original piece. I guess really original piece isn't the right. Original is not the right word to use, but the album version of the mincer, it just sounds so directionless, but there's a reason for that, because there was initially more to it. So listen to the full version. Again, the full version is a great track, but the version we ended up getting on the record, not so much for me. But let's go ahead and move on to side 2.
Okay.
And side 2, track 7, title track, Starless and Bible Black. Really kind of like We'll Let You Know. It's fine. It's okay. I think this one actually takes a little longer, for me at least, to get into. Once it gets going, it's a killer song. But I don't know. I don't really have much of an opinion on this one. I just think, like We'll Let You Know, it's fine.
I think of the two pieces that make up the last, because they're both instrumentals. Are they both improv? I think of the two, Fracture's the better one, but I do like Starless and Bible Black. And I'm glad it's ordered in the way it is, because I think Fracture ends the album on a high note, whereas I think if Fracture had been the first album, or excuse me, the first song, part of this side of the record, I don't think it would have worked as well. But I really actually do like both pieces a lot. I think I kind of agree with you, Stars and Bible Black. I think it could be a bit shorter. And I also think it was a bit of a mistake to put these two tracks as the last, as like an entire side. I think maybe they should have put some of these shorter tunes on the other side of the album just for balancing reasons.
I agree, and especially we were talking about how well sequenced Larks Tongues and Aspic is. I cannot say the same with this one, and I would almost be fine with completely looking at the track list, taking out the Mincer and Starless and Bible Black all together, and just making side 2 Trio and Fracture.
That would be good, yeah. I think I could honestly see, or at the very least shortening Starless and I would shorten Starless and Bible. I like how we're just like reorganizing this, by the way. I'd shorten Starless and Bible Black a bit. I'd get rid of We'll Let You Know and the Mincer. That's what I would do.
Okay,
and then put, like you said, put trio on the second side would be a good idea.
See,
so there you go. That's how this album should have been formatted.
Almost, yeah. Only I would say the only difference I would make is I would just take out Starless and Bible Black altogether, and the only reason why I would keep We'll Let You Know over that is because I think out of all the instrumentals, it's the most accessible. I mean, it's definitely very funky. And I think maybe in retrospect, that's why this one's kind of the underdog, because this one, out of all three, is the hardest to get into. Like I was saying how Larks, I wouldn't recommend that as a starting point. I would say this one is like the last probably King Crimson record you should check out.
Seriously, yeah.
And not because I don't think it's a bad record. That's not what I'm saying. But it's a hard one to listen to. It really is. It is by all means not accessible to the ears.
I think this is one that, in time, I think I'm going to listen to a couple more times before we do our final ranking and see if my opinion changes on it, because I think I just started to come around to this album a little bit, and maybe I just haven't listened to it enough, but I'll be interested to see if I give it a couple more spins, what my take is on it. Because sometimes I find like albums that are difficult to get into and listen to like this are much better are much better after multiple listens, and then are ultimately the more rewarding albums, you know? So, but yeah, this one, in a lot of ways, sounds like they just took a lot of pieces that they played live and just kind of threw it together, and quickly. I don't know if you know the story behind this album in terms of how they put it together, but that's kind of how it feels to me. So.
Yeah, I can understand that. Let's talk about Fracture really quick, because
okay,
we are we're in crunch time here.
Don't worry.
This one's a highlight for me, I think. This song, very similar to Larks Tongues and Aspic Part 2, but I would even argue it probably goes into even greater heights. I was reading in that Uncut magazine that Robert Fripp has said that this is the most difficult King Crimson song for him to play. And one thing I forgot to mention was when we introduced this album, even though a lot of these songs are improvised, this was one of the songs that he came in with initially when they were recording this one. And he actually received sole writing credit for this one. I think this might be the only King Crimson song where it's solely credited to Robert Fripp. But this song is just insane.
Yes, it is. This was definitely a high point to end the album off with. I was actually listening to it again this morning before we started recording this, actually, just to refamiliarize myself with it. And I think it's a great piece. I really do. It's got some excellent guitar work in it. It's a very intricate piece, so I can understand why Fripp would say that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what to say. I enjoyed it. It's definitely way stronger than Starless and Bible Black, and to me is probably one of the highlights of the album for sure.
Absolutely, I agree. So really quick, some bonus stuff, B-sides. Actually, it's just bonus tracks. We have a live version of a song called Dr. Diamond, which is just another improv piece. It was originally on the Great Deceiver box set. It's okay. Definitely better instrumental songs than that one. Same with Guts on My Side. That's also on the Great Deceiver box set. Again, it's a cool track, but they picked the best stuff for this album, really, I think. Then we also have the Mincer I talked about before, the Mincer / The Law of Maximum Distress. That's on the Great Deceiver box set, as well as it's one of the 50th anniversary singles. And then we also have a, not remaster, but remix version of Fracture done by Steven Wilson, also released as a 50th anniversary single. That's the version I've been listening to. I just think it sounds better than the original album version. If you haven't listened to that version of Fracture, check it out. I just think the instruments are more balanced, especially Fripp's guitar. I think it's more exposed. It's a little more buried in the original album mix. So I would recommend checking out that version of Fracture. What are your final thoughts on this one?
I think it's good, and basically, I think I summed it up before. I think I just need to listen to it more and see if I appreciate it more. But it's definitely the weakest to me of the three, but it's by no means a bad album. And I think if this is one, like you said, that people need to listen to way later, and maybe you'll appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree.
More. I know there's...
And I kind of, really summarized my point about it, too. Not one I would recommend, but what I really have to say about this one is this, more than the other two, I think, this record really showcases this era of King Crimson, specifically live. I mean, this was a live band. I mean, most of these tracks were live recordings that were later overdubbed in the studio, but this one really is a rewarding listen. When it clicks, it clicks.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying to start with it, but if you really get into this band, this is one to spend time with. It has some of the band's best stuff. It really does. Fracture is amongst some of this band's best stuff. Same with Lament. Trio we talked about too. Like, this does have some of the band's best songs. It really does.
That being said, what are your top three?
The top three, I think I would give it to Lament. It's my favorite, followed by Fracture. Probably then my third favorite would be The Great Deceiver. I really do like that song.
Ours are similar, except I would replace The Great Deceiver with Trio, so I'd probably go, for me, like Trio, Fracture, Lament, those three.
Cool.
So it's interesting that we kind of picked out the same kind of highlights, although I think our biggest disagreement would be The Great Deceiver. But I mean, I could honestly see why you'd like it, and I do like it instrumentally, but it's just anyway. Shall we move on to Red?
Yes, so here we go. So the last record of this, not only this episode of this trilogy of records, but ended up being the last record for this band for quite some time. I mean, at the time, if you had asked Mr. Frippo Pants, he would have told you that King Crimson ceases to exist, that the band is done. This is the last one. I actually read an interview in the Uncut magazine that took place the day after Red was released. So I guess he had, I think, broken the band up before Red came out. But yeah, to think that this could have been the last record. And with that being said, had this been the last King Crimson record, what a way to go.
Yeah, no kidding. And I believe, didn't he stop the band because he was having some kind of existential crisis?
There were a variety of reasons. That was definitely one of them. But he had also felt that, and I'm quoting him directly, that the band was becoming a dinosaur, which whatever that means. But he felt... Go ahead.
I think that I think I see his point, because I think at this point you got to also understand where progressive rock was going at this point. So this was released in 1974. Sorry to take that part from you, by the way. But this is when progressive rock had kind of peaked and was really starting to go a bit downhill, where you had a lot of bands. Like you had bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer who were getting really sort of redundant in some of the stuff they were doing. And prog had already kind of peaked and was on the downslope. In England, it wasn't too much. Maybe another year or two, it was when punk would start hitting the scene, which would just obliterate prog rock. So there's a lot of people. I remember watching a documentary actually about this, and a lot of the other musicians and particularly Bill Bruford talked about how, which is interesting because he was in the band, talked about how Robert Fripp actually made a really smart decision in ending King Crimson when he did, because he said that it was the perfect time for the band to end, given that the state of where music was at that time. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah,
that's an interesting point, and especially hearing Bill Bruford saying that, because I read at the time he was the most disappointed.
Yes.
That Fripp ended the band. I guess John Wetton had more of an open mind to it, but he was the most disappointed. But I think that's an interesting point, that in retrospect, because really looking back in 1974, like you said, in another year or two, we're seeing the rise of punk rock. I mean, Patti Smith's Horses came out in 75. You got the Ramones debut in 76. Sex Pistols, The Clash were late 70s. And then even thinking about where some of the other big prog bands were at this time, Peter Gabriel had just quit Genesis in 74. Yes put out Tales from Topographic Oceans, which was just too much as far as that. That's why we needed punk rock, quite frankly. And then, like you said, ELP, who I'm not really as familiar with, but I know that they did like to become Works, redundant and irrelevant around that time. Yeah,
they did like Works and Works 2, which is some of their more kind of it's their like Tales from Topographic Oceans. It's very musically impressive, but not very musical.
Yeah, no, for sure. But then on the other hand, you have King Crimson that put out their best record to date.
Yes, they did, and they ended it at a really good time, I think. They ended it while they were still at their peak, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. I was reading an interview with Fripp, and he was saying, despite the tension and feeling withdrawn, he was also saying that, he felt that the chaos was what really brought out the art. I find that very interesting. I would even say, too, that in a lot of ways, this is kind of like this band's Abbey Road.
I would agree. This is, to me, this is their... this is probably their greatest album. It's close between a couple of them, but I every time I think it's not, I listen to this album like, this is the best King Crimson album.
Well, and it's funny, I don't want to get ahead of myself again. I really want to save it for the last episode. I will acknowledge that it's the best King Crimson album. It is without a doubt the band's best album. Favorite, on the other hand, I'm not sure. That I'm not sure about. But I don't want to get too far ahead. But this record really just feels like a last record. Like, this really is a culmination of the first 6 King Crimson records.
Yeah. It was it's almost kind of like they were working towards this album, in my opinion, or at least Fripp, from the very beginning was working towards it. Like, to me, it's a culmination of everything that they had tried to do before, but honestly perfected, in my opinion.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So let's dive into it track by track, starting with side 1, track 1.
Oh, well, real quick, did you want to go over the overview, like it was released, where it was in 1974, number 45?
Yeah, I guess that would help, huh? So, so this one was released October 6th, 1974 on Island Records. It was number 45 on the UK charts, number 66 on the US Billboard 200. As we mentioned before, Fripp at this point was really just withdrawn from the band for a number of reasons, and a lot of this construction of this one kind of fell on Bill Bruford and John Wetton. we're also down to a trio at this point. Other
Yep.
than David
And
Cross featuring on Providence, which, that was an improv piece that they played on the 73 tour. It's just Fripp, John Wetton, and Bill Bruford. However, we do get a return from none other than Mel Collins and Ian McDonald.
Which, by the way, is fantastic, because, I don't know, Ian McDonald was definitely one of my, he was one of the highlights of the original King Crimson, and Mel Collins as well, both amazing, woodwind players and saxophone players and everything, and they both contribute to a track on this. I don't want to get ahead of myself either, and it's perfection. And the fact that it's two of the, they were both former members of the band, love it. Just absolutely love it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into it. So track 1, Red. That is the opening track, of course, purely instrumental, and I mean, I can assume that you would agree with me on this. This is one of their best instrumentals.
Oh, unquestionably, and like I said, it's what I was saying that Larks, Tongues, and Aspic Part 1 might be the best opening track in a King Crimson album, and the reason I say might is because of this track, because this is a fantastic opening track to me, and God, I love the riff. It's so dark, it's so heavy. I love oh man, this song has a menacing vibe. It
really is, and it's
the
very,
only thing.
Yeah, it's very, and it's really and I normally wouldn't use this word as a positive thing, but it's very calculated sounding.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this would be a contender for album opener. I think I would slightly have to give it to Larks, Tongues, and Aspic Part 1, but I mean, this is a killer opener. This is one of the band's best songs. One of the very few songs that King Crimson played throughout the years live. I think it might have been the only consistent 70s song that they played during the 80s lineup.
Yes, yep, that's definitely
at least if
true.
At least if we're, in terms of referencing some of the live albums that they officially released from the, the Discipline era of the band, that's really the only one that pops up. I don't even recall Schizoid Man. Larks, Tongues, and Aspect 2 was actually the other one. So this and Larks 2 were really the only two consistent songs that this band played really for the next several years. It really wasn't until, 2013, 2014 when they really started diving back into 70s stuff. But I digress. I don't want to get too, too off here. But this is just a great opener.
It really is. I don't know what else to say about it. The riff is great. Some of Fripp's best guitar here. I love the riff. And just dark, like you said, calculating. I love it. It's just a great way to start an album.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have anything else to say about it either, which I think is just really a testament as to how great this song is. So let's move on to track 2 then. Fallen Angel. This is another great song. I guess you could say this would be the ballad track on this one, but this one gets heavy pretty quickly. I was reading an interesting interview this morning, actually, from John Wetton, and he had said that with this song, that what's his name? Richard Palmer James. I blanked out for a second. The lyricist for this era of the band had a knack for taking these disjointed ideas from John Wetton and turning them into a cohesive lyric, cohesive story.
Right.
Which I thought was cool, and because I can't really pinpoint what this song is about, but I love it though. What are your thoughts?
I also really love it. There's a bit of... This is really the only part of the album, or one of very small parts of the album, where there's a little bit of light mixed with the dark. This is unquestionably their darkest album. And their heaviest as well. And I don't know, I actually really love Wetton's vocals on this track.
I do too.
And the next track, well, really the 3 tracks that there is vocals on this album. I think what I was telling you about how Wetton isn't my favorite vocalist, but his vocals are perfect for this album, for the vibe of this album, for the feel, like I don't know what it is. I think he just does a bang up job on this song, and I don't know. I like the melody of the vocals. I like that there's a little bit of, it's not acoustic, but kind of lighter playing in the middle there, with Fripp's guitar. And can we talk about the saxophone in the song?
No,
God, oh my God, it's so good.
And, again, it's great having Ian McDonald and Mel Collins back, because the saxophone is really just a welcomed highlight on this record as a whole, specifically on Fallen Angel.
Oh yes,
and as well on Starless, the title track, not title track, but yeah.
It's just a fantastic song. I don't know what else to say about it. I just love it.
I don't either. I find with my favorite songs, I have less to say, because there's just the song is borderline perfect.
Yeah.
There's really just nothing to nitpick. As is
this album.
Go ahead.
This whole album is that way for me. Like if you guys couldn't tell, this is my favorite album by them, and probably their best album. And it's just one of those. This to me is one of those albums, those few albums where it's just perfect from start to finish as far as I'm concerned. And the album, for the most part, just keeps getting better.
Yeah, no, I would more or less agree with that as well. And that very much continues with this next track, One More Red Nightmare. I mean, this song is like balls to the wall. It's heavy. Again, we're getting that funky element to it, which I love, especially with this era of the band. For a trio, like, all three of them are just locked in. I love John.
This might be my favorite.
What's that?
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that. This might be my favorite drumming of Bill Bruford's on this whole album.
Okay,
on this song.
Yeah,
I absolutely love the drumming in this song. I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
he does a lot of cymbal work and stuff.
Everyone has a highlight on this one, so it's so hard to like pick one specific, band member. But yeah, his drumming is phenomenal. I mean, this one. And I love John Wetton. You were talking about his vocals. I love his vocals on this one too.
Me too.
I had mentioned in the last episode when we talked about Islands that one to me sounded like a proto post rock song, and I was using the example of in the vein of the band Talk Talk. This song to me also is sort of like a proto post rock, but more in the vein of like heavier post rock. So like I'm thinking of bands like Godspeed You Black Emperor, Slint, bands like that I'm sure probably, like, this song had to have been an influence. Like, it's so good.
Yeah, and also there's I think anybody who really likes any heavy rock could appreciate this track. If you're a metal fan, if you're like a hard rock fan, there's also a bit of a, what do I want to say, like, I don't know. I think if you were a jazz fan, you could appreciate this track a lot. I don't know. There's a real heaviness to this track as well.
There really is. There's no way nothing was heavier than this in 1974.
Yeah.
And that's including Black Sabbath. Like, there's just no way.
Yeah, and there's still to this day, I can think of few albums that nearly are as dark as this album. There is a very dark undertone. This to me, is a in the heart of winter kind of deep depression album for me.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. And even just the lyrics on this one in particular are dark. I guess this one was about a nightmare inspired by the fear of flying. And tells the story of a man who falls asleep on a Greyhound bus. So, I mean, like, right down to its core, this is just a very dark, dark track. And one more thing about this one is we had both talked about on how a couple of the songs on Starless and Bible Black, how we both didn't like how they just abruptly cut off. This one abruptly cuts off too, but I like it. It kind of works, and it reminds me of I Want You, She's So Heavy a little bit by the Beatles, how that song just kind of abruptly stops, but then goes right into Here Comes the Sun. It works for this one, too,
I
how
agree.
it just cuts off, and then we go right into the eeriness of the next track.
which is Providence, of course, and that's improv, right, from the tour before it.
Yeah, that one is entirely improv. There's actually this
live.
one. The album version is an edited version. There's one of the bonus tracks is the full version, and this one for the longest time, for me at least, was my least favorite. I mean, it still is my least favorite. But I've at least grown an appreciation for it. This one for the longest.
It's my least favorite, but I don't think it takes away from the album at all. I think it
doesn't.
fits
I agree.
well.
I used to think that. I almost used to feel the same about this one as I still do with most of Moonchild, where it's just some of that pointless King Crimson noodling. But I've grown a new appreciation for this one, and especially coming off of literally side one. It's a great palate cleanser, and it's a great song that transitions right into the closing track.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'll say about that track is I do like David Cross's playing on it.
Yeah, David Cross's playing is great. Fripp's guitar solo is great, which is further expanded upon the full version of Providence. But it's, I really don't have a lot to say about it other than...
Same.
It has grown on me. It really has. I would still say it's my least favorite, but it's just as integral to this record as every other track, which I didn't feel that way a few years ago.
Yes, I agree, and I think the remasters help with that too.
Yeah, definitely. And then, of course, we have our last track, which... Where to even begin with this one?
Can I tell you a story about this track?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I used to work at a warehouse, and we used to be allowed to play music, and I used to play a bunch of stuff that a lot of people didn't like, but I played this album a few times, and this one dude was there, and he'd never heard this album before, and I played it for him. And he wasn't even a rock fan; he was kind of a hip hop guy, and by the time this song ended, he's like, I need to hear that song again. And he made me play it like 4 times. And he just loved the track. He'd never heard it before, and this one stood out to him. But then on the flip side, I played this recently for my wife, and she hated this, but she liked the rest of the album.
Yeah, you were telling me that story.
Weird.
And
yeah.
Like...
It hurt me a little bit. If you ever listen to this, sweetie, I have to say that our marriage almost got wrecked over that. No, I'm just
and that is why I will never play this for Cass. But yeah, I mean, and we're talking about Starless, and this song. Remember, I had said in the first episode about Bolero how I just felt that was one of probably the greatest things in just music ever.
Yes,
that's how I feel about this song. I mean.
That's how I feel about this one as well. This is probably, if I had to pick, if you put a gun to my head and say pick your favorite King Crimson song, I think I'd honestly pick this one.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, this, even not listening to the next 6 records, I have a feeling this is still going to remain my favorite King Crimson song. I mean, and rightfully so. I mean, this is the band's swan song, and especially if we're in that mindset that this could have very well been the last King Crimson record. Interesting enough, actually.
Yeah, what a way to go,
Yeah, seriously. Interesting enough. They had considered this song for Starless and Bible Black, hence the similar name, and the line Starless and Bible Black is, of course, part of the lyric of this song. But at the time, Bill Bruford and Robert Fripp didn't like it. They're like, no, we're not including this, because I guess John Wetton was the one that originally came up with the original chord and melody of this song, but they of course revisited for Red, and sorry, Mr. Fripp, but you couldn't have been any more wrong.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I love everything about this song, from like the soft kind of beginning with the mellotron, and the very very pretty sounding really guitar by Fripp, with the rip, do 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 do, like the soft guitar. I love it. And then after the lyrics are really nice, and then after that, how it kind of builds slowly into this kind of menacing behemoth of a track, and then goes insane at the end. It's like Schizoid Man on steroids at the end. And there's funny enough, I guess
steroids. I like that.
It really is, yeah. And like Mel Collins and Ian McDonald both play saxophone on this track, and they just go ape on at the end of the song. And the build up in this song is incredible. And I don't know, I can't praise this song enough. I just absolutely love it, and it might be some of their best musically. It might be their best piece of work. When they played this live, dude, when you know the towards the end of the song when it like really builds up and gets chaotic. Suddenly there was a like the entire theater got really dark, except there was this like glowing red light over the band, and I got goosebumps. It was like, oh,
getting goosebumps I went from you saying that. And I hope they play this.
I hope you
in September.
Yes, I really hope that they play it too. It was fantastic, and the fact that I saw them with Mel Collins playing, the original, person who played some of the sax on this track, unbelievable. Love this track.
I've always, going back to the last couple minutes of the song, when the entire band kicks in, because you got that 2 minutes of Fripp just, playing the same two guitar notes, that instrumental breakdown. I've always felt that sounded like an every man for himself thing, in the sense where it's like the guitar's trying to be the center of attention, but so is the drums, so is the bass, so is the sax, and that's always been my favorite part of the song.
Me too.
Which I could see why. On the flip side of that, why Rachel probably doesn't like that. I can definitely see that being, a turnoff for some people. But
I think it's
to me, it's my favorite part of the song.
I think it's a bit chaotic for some people, but it's my favorite part. The whole entire song is a build up with a big payoff at the end. It's a fantastic piece. I really love it.
Yeah, definitely. So let's go ahead because we got to really wrap this up. We are just hitting the 2 hour mark.
Agree. Yeah. I'm not surprised.
So let's just talk about some of the bonus and B-side stuff really quick. So this was another improv piece. I don't know if you had the chance to listen to this. It was also a bonus track on the 40th anniversary of this record. A Voyage to the Center of the Cosmos. This is a really cool song. If you haven't listened to it, check it out. I almost wish that this was included on Starless and Bible Black. I think this was originally also from the Great Deceiver box set, but that's a really cool song. We also had the full version of Providence, which I talked about before, so I'm not going to really get into that again. We have a live version of Starless, which this version was okay. I've heard better live versions from this era of the band, as well as other live versions from other different incarnations of this band. We also have Asbury Park, which is another improv piece, originally from the Live USA album, but also recently released as a 50th anniversary single. That's another great improv piece as well, of course recorded live at Asbury Park. And then this other one, which I don't really understand why it exists in the first place, but going back to the 50th anniversary singles, there is a edited version of Starless in Red. And what I don't like about this edit is the first half is Starless, and just as you get to what would normally be the instrumental breakdown that we were just raving about a couple minutes ago, it goes right into Red instead. And I guess David Singleton's, if you listen to the commentary, his reasoning for this is when him and Robert Fripp were putting together the Frame by Frame box set, also in the 90s, I guess their thought process was just a reimagining of those two songs. So I guess if you look at it from that point of view, sure, that's interesting, but it's like you edited out my favorite part, or my favorite section of Starless.
I honestly... Yeah, I can't see that working. I haven't listened to it, but I
recommend listening to it.
That's my favorite part too.
To hear it once, but I think you're gonna agree with me. I don't understand it. But if you look at it from that context, sure, fine, but no. Stick with both of these.
I completely agree. I agree. How would you rank these? The top, or not rank them, but like what would be your top three?
My top three would be, and this is really tricky. God, probably Starless would be my favorite, of course. Then one more, Red Nightmare, and then Red. Yeah.
And then Red. And we have the exact same
in
list.
the same order too.
Yeah, and then it's pretty close, but Fallen Angel's really great too. But yeah, it would probably go that and then Providence last. But I love the whole album. It's one of those albums that should be listened to as an entire piece.
Yeah,
you know?
no, this and that would be, if we were ranking all 5 tracks, that would be my ranking too. But I mean, everything is great, like we said, and you know, I go back to, what if this really was the last King Crimson record? And I mean, really, what a way to go.
Yeah.
Of course, this wasn't the last record. And when we do talk about the next era of the band, if you want to talk about polar opposite, I mean, the next 3 records that we'll talk about in the next episode, this band definitely diverts. And I'm really looking forward to the next episode, because now we're reaching to the point where, other than Discipline, for the most part, these records are going to be the first time I listen to them. So I'm really looking forward to what my opinions are going to be with, 3 of a Perfect Pair, Beat, and I'm interested to see your stance on them too. And then maybe we'll even talk about what Fripp was doing in between these 2 periods, because boy, we're talking 74 they disbanded, 81 is when they get back together. So
81.
There's a good 7-year in between, and he did do a lot in between. I don't want to get too ahead right now on that, but on one hand, you could say Red was really an end of an era, but on the other hand, and I think that's what's just so great about this band, it's really interesting to see where they're gonna go from here. What are your thoughts?
I think you sum it up really nice. Like I said, we'll definitely highlight some stuff that happens between this album and the next album, because there's quite a gap in time. But there is certainly the band really changes after this, and it'll be definitely be interesting to dissect some of these the 80s period of King Crimson for sure. It's also, there's a lot of uncharted territory for me as well. Much like you, I'm mostly familiar with Discipline, and that's pretty much
Discipline, I know very well, and then really everything after Discipline I've either listened to once many, many years ago or have not listened to at all. So it'll be interesting to see what our thoughts are moving forward, as well as when we compare those records to the first 7 that we've covered so far. Yeah, so that's really it for today.
I guess I'm gonna assume this will be really quick, but how would you order the albums?
That's right. Yeah. So here's the thing with that. I acknowledge that Red is the best King Crimson record. As far as favorite, I'm torn between Red and Larks Tongues and Aspic.
And Larks.
So now, I'm gonna say for me it's Starless and Bible Black, and then I'm at a tie with Larks Tongues and Aspic and Red. Whether that changes for the final episode will remain to be seen. But right now, I'm I'm torn with Larks being potentially my favorite King Crimson record.
Well, hey, you know what? They're both great records. I can see why. For me, it's Red, Larks, and Starless. That would be Red hands down. But I definitely agree that Larks is a fantastic record, and Starless is better than I thought it was. So, it's been really fun revisiting these 3 albums, and I've really it's always a pleasure to listen to Red, and it was nice to kind of reacquaint myself with Larks and kind of really appreciate Starless for the first time, I think.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
So.
And, this era of the band is just incredible. I mean, currently, like I said, it's my favorite period. That could change, of course. But for now, this is when King Crimson, as we both said earlier in the episode, became King Crimson. I do stand by saying that I wouldn't put Larks or Starless and Bible Black as starting points, but I think Red I would include as a place to start, along with In the Court of the Crimson King.
I would agree. I would say Red and Court should be the two you start with.
I think
personally.
I think Red, if you want to use the word accessible, of the three, is the most accessible.
Yeah.
I think it's just as cohesive sounding as Larks Tongues and Aspic. I think there's just a great sequencing of the tracks. It's really Starless and Bible Black is the only one where I'm a little more as far as the sequencing goes. But Larks and Starless and Bible Black are probably a little harder on the ears than Red, so that's why I wouldn't recommend them as starting points, but they're both rewarding listens.
I completely agree with that. And with that, everybody, I think we're going to end this podcast since we're well over 2 hours.
Not counting the potty break, this episode ended up being just as long as the first episode.
The potty break. But we want to thank you guys for listening to this episode. It was really fun. As always, Andrew, I really enjoyed talking music with you, and I'm really excited for the next part.
Yeah, me too, man. And guys, we're just so you know, we're aiming for probably around 2 weeks from today for episode 3. Would you say that sounds about right?
Around 2 weeks, something like that, give or take. Yes.
But yeah. That's really all I have. Again, we weren't expecting this to be as long as it ended up
so
being,
long.
but
yeah,
these are also 3 very important records for this band. Yeah, that's probably a poor way to end it, but that's really all I have.
Well, with that, guys, thanks for listening and checking out the Sound of Music podcast. As always, we appreciate your support, and we hope you found some stuff interesting, and check out these albums.
Yeah, and bye.
See you later. Peace.